Over the vast sweep of centuries, a land rich in mountains, rivers, and endless plains has witnessed the rise and fall of countless peoples. From ancient civilizations who walked its forests long before history was written, to a fledgling nation daring to defy the most powerful empire on earth, the story of America is one of ambition, conflict, and reinvention. But how did scattered colonies become a global superpower? What triumphs and tragedies shaped its destiny? Today, we journey through centuries of struggle and hope, war and peace, to uncover the epic, unbroken story of the United States of America. Long before the name America was spoken, this vast continent was a tapestry of nations, each with its own traditions, languages, and ways of life. From the icy reaches of the Arctic, where the Inuit thrived in harmony with a frozen sea, to the warm deserts of the Southwest, home to the Pueblo peoples and their intricate adobe cities, North America was anything but empty. Great civilizations rose and flourished. The Mississippian culture built towering earthen mounds and thriving trade networks along the rivers. The Iroquois Confederacy forged a sophisticated political alliance that would inspire democratic ideals centuries later. In the Great Plains, nomadic tribes followed the massive herds of bison, while along the Pacific coast, the Haida and Tlingit carved stories into towering totem poles. The land itself was abundant beyond measure. Endless forests teeming with game, rivers heavy with fish, fertile valleys ready for planting, and mineral riches hidden deep within the earth. To the indigenous peoples, this was not just territory, it was sacred, alive with spirit, and inseparable from their identity. This was the world that awaited the first European sails on the horizon, a land ancient, vibrant, and already home to millions. The late 15th century marked a turning point in world history. Across the Atlantic Ocean, European powers cast their eyes toward the unknown, driven by ambition, faith, and a hunger for wealth. The Spanish came first, their sails cutting through uncharted waters. In the Caribbean and the southern reaches of what is now the United States, they planted their flags, building missions and forts. Conquistadors pushed into Florida, the Southwest, and beyond, seeking gold and souls to convert. To the north, the French explored the winding waterways of the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes, establishing a fur trade empire in harmony, and at times in conflict, with indigenous nations. They built alliances with tribes like the Huron, relying on native knowledge to survive and prosper in the vast wilderness. Then came the British. In 1607, on the banks of the James River, Jamestown was founded, the first permanent English settlement in North America. Harsh winters, famine, and disease decimated the colony, but tobacco soon transformed it into a profitable venture. 13 years later, in 1620, the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, seeking freedom to worship in their own way. Their first brutal winter claimed many lives, but alliances with local tribes like the Wampanoag offered a fragile lifeline. Yet, beneath moments of cooperation lay a growing storm. Cultural misunderstandings, competition for land, and the spread of European diseases devastated indigenous populations. What began as cautious trade soon gave way to distrust, raids, and violent conflict. By the mid-17th century, the balance of power in North America was shifting. The stage was set for a clash of empires, and for the birth of a new nation. By the mid-18th century, the British colonies along the eastern seaboard had grown from fragile outposts to bustling communities. Yet, while colonists farmed their lands, built their towns, and traded across the Atlantic, they remained under the firm grip of the British Crown. That grip began to tighten after the costly French and Indian War. To pay its debts, Britain imposed new taxes, the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, without granting the colonies any voice in Parliament. The rallying cry of "no taxation without representation" echoed from Boston to Virginia. Tensions erupted in acts of defiance. The Boston Massacre stained the snow with blood. The Boston Tea Party sent chests of tea into the harbor's dark waters. In 1775, musket fire at Lexington and Concord marked the beginning of open war. Farmers, merchants, and tradesmen, now soldiers, took up arms against the world's most powerful military. On July 4, 1776, representatives of the 13 colonies adopted the Declaration of Independence, drafted primarily by Thomas Jefferson. It proclaimed that all men are created equal, endowed with rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, ideals that would shape the identity of the new nation. The Revolutionary War was long and grueling. From Washington's daring crossing of the icy Delaware to the Franco-American victory at Yorktown, the struggle tested the endurance of the young republic. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris granted the United States its independence. But freedom demanded a foundation. In 1787, delegates gathered in Philadelphia to frame the Constitution, creating a system of checks and balances unlike any seen before. 2 years later, the Bill of Rights enshrined freedoms of speech, religion, and assembly, a promise to safeguard liberty for generations to come. In the decades after independence, the United States looked westward with an unshakable sense of purpose. Vast, untamed lands stretched beyond the Appalachian Mountains, promising opportunity, wealth, and adventure. This drive became known as Manifest Destiny, the belief that the nation was destined, even divinely ordained, to expand from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Louisiana was purchased from France in 1803, doubling the young nation's size. Lewis and Clark charted the unknown, while settlers in covered wagons braved dangerous trails to carve out new lives on the frontier. But expansion came at a cost. Native American tribes were forced from ancestral lands in waves of displacement, none more infamous than the Trail of Tears, where thousands perished on forced marches west. Still, the push continued. Texas was annexed, California claimed, and the dream of a continental nation became reality. At the same time, the Industrial Revolution transformed America's economy. Steam engines powered factories and locomotives, cotton gins revolutionized agriculture, and cities swelled with immigrants seeking work. The North embraced industry, while the South's economy remained rooted in vast plantations worked by enslaved Africans. It was here that the seeds of division deepened. As new states joined the Union, the question loomed: would they permit slavery? Every compromise, from the Missouri Compromise to the Compromise of 1850, only delayed the inevitable clash. Abolitionist voices grew louder in the North, while the South defended slavery as its economic backbone and social order. By the mid-19th century, America stood at a crossroads, a nation full of promise, but also on the brink of tearing itself apart. Westward dreams and industrial progress could not mask the moral and political storm gathering on the horizon. In 1861, the fragile balance between North and South shattered. 11 Southern states seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. The first shots were fired at Fort Sumter, and the Civil War, the bloodiest conflict in American history, had begun. The war raged across fields, forests, and rivers. Early Confederate victories at Bull Run tested the Union's resolve, but battles like Antietam, the single bloodiest day in American history, showed the terrible cost ahead. In 1863, Union forces under General Ulysses S. Grant seized Vicksburg, gaining control of the Mississippi River, while at Gettysburg, the tide began to turn. Over 3 days, Union troops repelled General Robert E. Lee's invasion of the North in a battle that would become a symbol of sacrifice and endurance. That same year, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in Confederate-held territories free. It transformed the war's purpose, from preserving the Union to also ending slavery, and encouraged nearly 200,000 African Americans to join the Union ranks. In 1865, after 4 years of unimaginable bloodshed, the Confederacy surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. Lincoln would not live to see the healing. He was assassinated days later. The years that followed, known as Reconstruction, brought both hope and hardship. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments abolished slavery, granted citizenship, and protected voting rights for African American men. Federal troops occupied the South to enforce these changes, but resistance was fierce. Violence from groups like the Ku Klux Klan, economic ruin, and political corruption hindered progress. By 1877, federal forces withdrew, and many gains for African Americans were eroded under new laws enforcing segregation. The Civil War had preserved the Union and ended slavery, but the wounds of division ran deep, scars that would shape America for generations to come. As the 19th century drew to a close, the United States was transforming at a pace the world had rarely seen. Waves of immigrants poured into its ports: Italians, Irish, Germans, Jews from Eastern Europe, Chinese laborers, and many others, each seeking the promise of a better life. Cities like New York, Chicago, and San Francisco swelled with new arrivals, their streets alive with dozens of languages, cultural traditions, and the sense of foreign kitchens. Industrial growth surged. The steel mills of Pittsburgh roared day and night, railroads stitched the continent together, and electric light illuminated homes and streets. Innovators like Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, and the Wright brothers turned dreams into reality, from the light bulb to the telephone to the first powered flight. But America's ambitions were no longer confined to its borders. In 1898, the nation went to war with Spain. The Spanish-American War was brief but decisive, resulting in U.S. control over former Spanish territories including Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, as well as influence over Cuba. America had emerged as a new global power. The early 20th century brought both prosperity and challenges. When war erupted in Europe in 1914, the United States at first stood apart. But unrestricted submarine warfare and the infamous Zimmerman telegram drew the nation into World War I in 1917. American troops, known as doughboys, joined the Allies in the trenches of France, tipping the balance toward victory. By the war's end in 1918, over 100,000 Americans had lost their lives, but the United States stood firmly among the world's great powers. In just a few decades, America had grown from a recovering post-war nation into an industrial, military, and cultural giant, a nation poised to shape the century ahead. The roaring prosperity of the 1920s seemed unstoppable, until it wasn't. In October 1929, the stock market crashed, wiping out fortunes overnight. Banks failed, businesses closed, and unemployment soared. By the early 1930s, 1 in 4 Americans was out of work. Dust storms ravaged the Great Plains, forcing thousands of farming families to abandon their homes in what became known as the Dust Bowl. Bread lines stretched for blocks. Despair was everywhere. Into this darkness stepped President Franklin D. Roosevelt, promising a new deal for the American people. Through massive public works programs, banking reforms, and social safety nets like Social Security, Roosevelt sought to revive the economy and restore hope. While recovery was slow, these policies reshaped the relationship between Americans and their government, laying the foundation for modern social programs. Even as the nation struggled, storm clouds gathered overseas. In 1939, World War II erupted in Europe. The United States at first remained neutral, supplying weapons and aid to the Allies. But on December 7, 1941, Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor thrust America into the war. Millions of men and women mobilized, soldiers fighting on distant fronts, factory workers producing the tanks, planes, and ships that fueled the Allied effort. From the beaches of Normandy to the islands of the Pacific, American forces played a decisive role. In 1945, the war ended with the unconditional surrender of Germany and Japan, the latter after the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The cost was staggering: over 400,000 American lives lost. Yet, victory left the United States standing as one of 2 global superpowers, its economy booming, its influence stretching across the world. The post-war era had begun, and with it, a new kind of conflict. In the aftermath of World War II, the United States found itself locked in a new kind of struggle, not for territory, but for ideology. Across the globe, the capitalist democracy of America stood in stark opposition to the communist regime of the Soviet Union. This Cold War was fought in the shadows, through espionage, propaganda, and an ever-escalating nuclear arms race. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 brought the world to the brink, as U.S. and Soviet forces stood poised for mutually assured destruction. At home, America confronted another battle, for civil rights. African Americans, long denied equality, marched, protested, and risked their lives to dismantle segregation. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X became symbols of a movement that demanded the nation live up to its founding ideals. Meanwhile, abroad, the fight against communism pulled America into the jungles of Southeast Asia. The Vietnam War became a bitter, controversial conflict, costing over 58,000 American lives and dividing the nation. Televised images of combat and protest brought the war home in ways never seen before. By the 1970s, America was a nation both proud of its global role and deeply scarred by its struggles, still striving to define its place in a changing world. In 1991, the Cold War ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union. For the first time in decades, the United States stood as the world's sole superpower. Its economy strong, its culture and influence reaching every corner of the globe. The 1990s brought relative peace and a wave of technological innovation, from personal computers to the dawn of the Internet. But on September 11, 2001, that sense of security was shattered. Coordinated terrorist attacks by Al-Qaeda struck New York City and Washington, D.C., killing nearly 3,000 people. The images of the collapsing Twin Towers seared themselves into the nation's memory. In response, the United States launched the War on Terror, invading Afghanistan to dismantle Al-Qaeda and later Iraq under the claim of eliminating weapons of mass destruction. At the same time, technology advanced at breakneck speed. Smartphones, social media, and digital connectivity transformed how Americans worked, communicated, and lived, creating new opportunities but also new challenges. Silicon Valley became a symbol of innovation, shaping the 21st century economy. As America moved deeper into the new millennium, it faced a complex reality, a leader in a globalized, digital world, yet still wrestling with security threats, political divides, and the question of what its future should be. The story of America is far from finished. It is a nation built on ideals yet tested by its own contradictions, a place of boundless opportunity and deep struggle. From its birth in revolution to its rise as a global power, each chapter has been written in courage, conflict, and change. Today, America stands at another crossroads, facing challenges of unity, justice, and its role in an ever-shifting world. But its history shows a pattern. Reinvention is in its very nature. And so, the next chapter awaits, unwritten, uncertain, and full of possibility.